That's a lot of years. This is a game with 11 years of experience behind it, so we're gonna need some ground rules to keep this train from derailing too quickly. And a large deal of that comes from how this game just treats weapons in general. The movesets are way more diverse than any Souls game. Like, I would say even for what, like, how... The movesets are way more diverse than any Souls game. Like, I would even say weapon for weapon, not even Elden Ring competes. All 26 armaments at your disposal have enough attacks somewhere in their moveset that allow them to handle way more situations than you'd think. So I'm going into each weapon assuming they're using a build that feeds into their potential, but also taking a look at the moveset of each weapon itself, how versatile they are at handling the game's general threats, and what each weapon is air quote best at. The way this game puts a heavy emphasis on how you build into a weapon rather than the weapon itself ensures that all of them remain punishing enough for any combat situation, and not even the shitters are really that far behind one another. The final result should still be a video a lot of people disagree with, and some of you are probably gonna get pissed off, but hopefully I'm able to put together something at least semi-objective here. Number 26, the Kos Parasite. This weapon is so awkward and unwieldy that it genuinely makes the combat less exciting to participate in. This is the best argument for stealth playthroughs in Bloodborne, because seeing the damage and speed my R1s are capable of is the perfect incentive to engage with as little of the game as possible. Like, anti-drug ads aren't this effective. No charged R2, visceral attacks are a chore, way too slow in both modes, and cost way too much stamina. The attack values are some of the highest in the game when paired with the Milkweed rune, probably the highest for basic R1s, but the base damage is so low and its thirst for good arcane gems handicaps it so much that you need to have found a near perfect setup just to make it stand up and compete with other weapons. And I wouldn't subject that much chalice dungeon grinding to someone who murdered my son. It's fine for weapons to have dedicated builds, like Chikage and Bloodletter are some of my favorite weapons, but the Parasite isn't that. This doesn't feel like I need a dedicated build. It feels like I need the correct build or I'm fucked from the jump. The backstep R1 is this weird vomit glob attack that's meant to build up poison on enemies, but the standard moveset is nowhere near fast enough for a poison build, and the poison produced by the vomit is slow poison anyway, so it's not even the good one. The only attack worth even a lowercase damn is the L2 attack when transformed, which is a massive arcane damage AoE that needs 2 Quicksilver bullets to fire off, but you also need a long enough curtain of safety for the attack, lest a friendly bump on the shoulder knock you out of the windup. Most other weapons have little unique advantages that don't really click with you until you've played with them for a while, because they don't show up on stat sheets or calculators. The Beast Cutter's ability to break limbs, the forward and back steps on the Beasthunter Saif's transform attacks, the Burial Blade being an absolute rally machine. This one has a vegetable head? Yeah, it's got nothing. Oh, it has less iframes during dodges. Sorry, I almost forgot about that part. I guess that's its unique advantage. Oh yeah, and you're not dealing physical damage either, so you can't build up beasthood with it. What the fuck were they thinking with this? Number 25, the Boom Hammer. A hammer that goes boom. It tells you everything you'll ever need to know about how it functions. And that's a trend with these DLC early hunter weapons where not a lot of knowledge was cultivated yet about the enemy, and everything they fought with didn't have the same refinement from hunters of tomorrow that knew the exact math and science, the minimum centrifugal force generated by a pneumatic device required to rip a demon's penis off. This feels like an earlier variant of the Tonitrus, where instead of transforming it to keep the weapon buffed for a certain time, it's just a one and done sort of deal, which doesn't feel nearly as effective. And this being the only difference between normal and trick mode makes for quite an accomplishment in the hunter's arsenal, which is a weapon that makes explosions boring. It really could have used something different too, because the standard moveset is the only moveset, and it's a painfully slow moveset at that. The fire damage isn't even that good when it's applied. Like, I mean, I get more damage is more damage, but I can't even justify using fire gems on this thing because of how unhelpful it is to the total AR. The Oil Urn charged R2 combo is really nice when it works, and it returns even greater numbers when placed on a weapon with fire gems that deal only fire damage, but this isn't even a build option the weapon gives you access to because of the hammer's innate fire damage already built into the weapon. So if I'm going to use that strategy, I'm much better off using a weapon friendly to element conversion. Something like a stake driver or LHB or some other weapon with like an absurdly high attack value somewhere. I eventually realized that that starting with an R1 and then leading into an L1 transform attack before alternating between the two is a good way to be dealing constant fire damage, since the hammer always stays alight. But this didn't feel like a shortcut I found. It felt like being locked in a sensory deprivation tank, and once every hour a kid flicks the glass to give me a sense of hope. It's just a middle-of-the-road, slightly underperforming blunt meat tenderizer that occasionally explodes every once in a while to make sure you're still awake paying attention to the fucking game. Number 24, the Amygdalan Arm. Shit, I thought the boom hammer was unwieldy to use. The standard R1 chain on this thing handles like a mining truck with a drunk driver. They really were just out here picking shit up off the floor and using it as weapons, huh? Did the hunters wielding these decide they were going to use it as a weapon before the arm was detached? Like, what was the order of events here that took place for this weapon to happen? I could see some primitive research being done to suggest amygdalan bones were like a hard enough substance to double as blunt weapons, and then the arm nerves start twitching and slashing away at nothing, and one freak had to be like, no, hang on, now wait a minute. The moveset is just as slow and cumbersome as you'd expect, which kinda sucks because the actual damage you get per strike feels really nice. The focus here is pretty obviously strength, since arcane is left behind both in the damage department and in scaling by a good couple letter grades. It's there to be an accessory, and as a failsafe in case you run into enemies with higher arcane defense, not to be built around. If I've clusterfucked a run so hard that I start considering arcane gems on a weapon with visibly higher strength scaling, I either don't know how the alphabet works, or I'm just trying really hard to stay positive. The transformed mode just seems to be a slightly faster moveset with better range and no difference in stamina. I probably wouldn't switch to its standard mode very often at all unless I was just passing by it with a transform attack. Performing a charged R2 while the hand, blade, scythe, knife, claw thing is out deals a massive hit of damage, followed by two smaller hits when the hand, blade, scythe, knife, fingernail, claw, necromorph, limb thing will start slashing around the vicinity of where the attack lands. And if all three instances of damage land on the same target, it could potentially earn a spot on the leaderboard as one of the game's most damaging charged R2s available. In truth, I think this had me sticking with the weapon far longer than I probably should have, because for every hit of dopamine that came with landing a charged R2 and watching the claw swipe the enemies afterwards for massive additional damage, I could have counted like 10 other instances where the rest of the moveset was just too slow to properly stun lock, and I don't think I've broken a single limb or weak point with this weapon at all, which is insane because it's just an enormous femur repurposed into a mallet. And I even found myself whiffing with its whip mode pretty frequently. I don't know, this moveset just feels like it gives you an amalgamation of different tactics that some other weapon is always just slightly better at. You like flattening fuckers into a fine paste with your Unga Bunga build? Well, you've got the wheel, the Whirligig, the Kirkhammer. You like whipping bitches? Well, you should probably be using the cane. You like slow charged R2s with lots of damage? Well, stake driver's where it's at. Number 23, the Tonitrus. Hearing that impact sound blast the shit out of the ground whenever that one shadow of Yharnam used this weapon tricked me into thinking it was gonna be really slow and unwieldy. And the hunter NPC that uses it beforehand revs it back up after every other swing, so I could never get a proper eyeful of its complete attack chain. But that attack speed from the basic R1s had my eyebrows strategically moving into the pleasantly surprised position. Charged R2s are decently quick. R1 spam gets even stupider when in taser form, but bigger enemies tend not to receive any kind of blowback from it unless it's a really hard-hitting attack with a lot of impact, which is likely going to be either the charged R2 or the jumping R2. It's only capable of two types of damage, which is blunt damage and bolt damage. Even the little poke attacks from the weapon just deal blunt damage, despite the motion being a thrust. And being a self-buffable weapon means it locks you out of buffing it with fire paper as well. This makes it a really stubborn weapon that gets very difficult dealing with enemies with high resistances in either of its damage specialties. Like, even specialties feels like a generous way of putting it. Like, if you run into something strong versus either damage type, then you're just fucked. It's an iron ball attached to a stick. Like, blunts and bolts is all you're tossing around here. Number 22, the Beast Cutter. I understand beast hunting was quite the learning process back in the day, so the inelegance can be excused to some extent. But why does my hunter, with all the knowledge and skill way past this point in time, swing it as clumsily as the dudes who use it? Basic R1s in its default mode don't exactly give me the impression that I know what I'm doing with this, but the whip form confidently exhibits some of the worst recovery periods you'll ever push through, and transform attacks in both modes are carried out at a Monday morning traffic jam pace that makes it feel like I tied cinder blocks to my wrists before heading out to hunt. Putting the barbarism and unwieldiness aside, the basic cleaver form does feel like it's doing way more work against a larger variety of shitters than what the whip mode attempts. On the whip mode, the attack values are expectedly weaker since it's being swung across a really wide vicinity a la Threaded Cane, but the basic attacks do seem to have a stronger effect on enemy hyper armor while in this mode, which I'm guessing is the intent behind such clumsily long recovery windows, since, you know, the recovery windows aren't going to matter if your enemy's knees are broken. The follow-up R2 attack on the whip form has a stagger value even larger than that, but with the consequence of having to commit to 2 whole heavy attacks. I still think the whip form has too many strikes against it to be worth it personally. Honestly, I think the speed of the whip form is just too slow to keep up with most crowds, despite it being intended as a crowd killer. I tried fighting the long fight against Rom by just killing all the little spider ads that drop in so I wouldn't need to worry about them when I got up close, and it felt like it took longer than what it would have had I just used the cane or burial blade or any other weapon that targeted crowds with good range. Probably because those other 2 weapons don't use nearly as much stamina. I'm having to dedicate 25 stamina per strike for this thing just for its basic R1s. If you're running through the game once per weapon or something and the completionist inside you just absolutely needs to use this on a run, build into the charged R2. It's already capable of flinching enemies as big as Nightmare Executioners in the DLC, and it's also the highest attack value available to that weapon, sitting at 190. So from there, you're just a good striking gem or 2 away from stomping bosses so hard on the mouth they'll need to sit down to brush their teeth. Number 21, the Reiterpallasch. The transformed R1 chain is fast as shit. Alright, that's about it for the positives. Damn, that's a B in Arcane at +10. Wow. You imagine doing something with that? I can't. The default R1 chain is mostly thrusting damage, a nice benefit in and of itself, but when accounting for all the prior instances that damage type just shows up on a weapon unannounced, it doesn't really feel like the novelty it was introduced as. Bone Marrow Ash can't be used on the transformed gun mode since it's technically a right-handed armament, but it can accept up to 3 blood gems, and specifically tempering damage gems that increase the attack power of both the blade and the gun, where normal firearms can usually only use 1 gem, if that. Tempering gems I think work the best here since blood damage is also physical, but that's really the only setup that ensures both the blade and the gun are getting significant improvements from anything. The transformed R1 is noticeably quicker to whip out at the expense of not dealing any thrust damage, making the fact that you can turn it into a gun the signature and debatably only worthwhile feature of its transformed shorter mode, and it makes a nice clicking sound, so I guess that's 2 benefits. However, I will give it some praise on its parrying proficiency, since shooting the gun mode feels no different from just using a regular sidearm like Evelyn or the Hunter pistol, making the parry playstyle feel very natural with only 1 trick weapon and technically no pistol. And the visceral damage you're handing out only gets better with thrust damage blood gems since visceral damage is considered a thrust attack, which already pairs wonderfully with the Reiterpallasch and its thrust heavy moveset. It's a bit of a knowledge check, and perhaps that's why a lot of people think this weapon is poo-poo tier, but like most tools of destruction, knowing how to, well, fucking use them correctly is half the battle. Number 20, the Rifle Spear. It's a blunderbuss, and it's a spear at the same time. And apparently my brain is simple enough to consider that cool, because the Rifle Spear is probably my favorite early game weapon despite its shortcomings. Contrary to its title, the full moveset of this weapon features more than just gunshots and pokes. The transformed shorter mode allows for slashing R1s that are just barely slower than the default R1s, and is only standard physical damage as opposed to thrust in the basic mode, save for its charged R2, which I would personally and proudly call one of my favorite attacks on any weapon. The attack value of 245 is already enough to lure me into making some pretty bad decisions trying to land it, but the forward charge you do before the hit lands is what makes this attack so brainlessly powerful. And despite the well-founded complaints the weapon has earned itself over the years, none of it has anything to do with this attack. That little forward advance may not feel like a lot of distance, but you can begin charging this long before you're ever actually within threat range of an approaching enemy, and by the time they've gotten close to you, the attack is already in progress, the package has left the facility, and there's not shitting hell almost any enemy can do about it. This is one of the easiest charged R2s to land on any target. If you're looking for a new way to play with the Rifle Spear and thrust, blood tinge, hybrid builds just aren't cutting it for you, slap a handful of striking gems on this bitch. You will laugh your ass off at how effective it is. It's not as good at building Beasthood as the Reiterpallasch just because it's a bulkier weapon with a slower moveset, but the relationship the Reiterpallasch has with parrying and visceral damage also extends to the Rifle Spear as well. well, since visceral damage is thrust damage, which just so happened to include a lot of the spear's basic attacks, including its charged R2 when transformed. And when properly fixed up with thrust damage gems, this becomes the rifle spear's ace in the hole. I've seen thumbnails and videos and forums and whatnot talk about this weapon being the worst trick weapon in the game, and I'm just like curious. You know, like, I'm not even mad, like, I'm impressed. How did you come to that? How did no one stop you on this journey of yours? The Parasite needs some of the hardest gems to farm and removes iframes from your dodge. This weapon can be built to have one of the most absurdly powerful parry builds in the game, and people said this one was worse. I like actually dare people to tell me I'm wrong on this placement. We need to move on. We need to move on like right now. I'm about to go off script in like a really mean way. Number 19, Blade of Mercy. Kinda sucks that this one landed down here, because this is a really cool weapon. But even despite its low placement, it still remained a weapon I consistently defaulted to when something I wanted to kill suddenly felt like slamming some Adderall and 10 pounds of sugar. Blade of Mercy is one of the only weapons that allow you the reflexes to keep up with the game's highest pedigree of annoyingly fast bullshit. Looking at the attack values for this weapon seems to support this combat style as well, since the dodging attack values are all noticeably higher than normal, while consuming a very small amount of stamina, lending to the idea that using this weapon optimally means doing the deathly dance of dodge hit dodge with an equally nimble partner. Spend enough time going on leisurely jogs with Eileen and the game eventually demonstrates this to you firsthand. But I still think there's a bit more to this weapon here than just using it to counter hunter NPCs, and that additional flexibility can be found in its transformed mode. The attack values start at 90 for the first 3 transformed R1 attacks, before hitting a spike of 120 during the 4th attack. You also get noticeably smaller recoveries from the 4th hit all the way to the final 8th hit before the moveset then loops the faster half of the attack sequence. This is honestly a bit of a chore to pull off at times because you do need to sink in a few hits with the R1 chain before it really starts paying off. And even though these attacks come out fast and cost like almost no stamina, the juicy single target damage versus giant fat ass bosses hinges on you reaching the second half of that R1 chain, which usually just results in a moment of unchecked greed that has you taking unnecessary damage. Sadly, these can't be buffed or infused with elemental gems either due to its innate arcane damage on the side, which I believe is the most unfortunate part of the whole weapon because it was forced to sacrifice all that extra space and flexibility for 30 measly points of arcane damage, leaving you with an offense deficit that starts feeling really sore against bigger bosses like Lawrence and Ludwig. The faster R1 chain when transformed isn't nearly as good for beasthood buildup as I kind of wanted it to be. I feel like it would have fit within the scope of gradually ramping up attack power demonstrated in the weapon's own motion values and animations. There's still plenty of room here to excavate some dungeons and put together a pretty mean poison build with some murky gems that support the weapon's faster attack speed, and the S scaling and skill gives it plenty of potential for sharp gems. But putting down public transport buses with nothing but raw damage output means a good set of temperings is probably just the best straightforward option. Number 18, the Beast Claw.
Well, I don't want to play the game for my content. I like it when the game plays itself.
What I like, bitch, is not waiting for 7 to 8 months for someone to decide this weapon should be better and then lock the catalyst of that change behind a boss whose opening attack is to wag his finger at me and start explaining why he technically isn't a repeat boss. Fuck New Game Plus scaling. Do you know how much boring, barely watchable footage I was sitting on of me just getting zoned? The amount of work I have to put into this weapon for it to reach an optimal state is tremendously overpacked, and fittingly, it also overpacks the Beast Claw's total move list to that of a character from Soul Calibur. Your L2 now performs an AoE howl that can hit multiple targets, meant to charge up Beasthood incredibly fast. You do lose access to charged R2s, but the jumping R2 can still leave enemies vulnerable to being visceraled if struck from behind. The R1 chain looks way cooler now. A transformation attack from normal to beast mode has been added to the moveset that wasn't there before, and the regular R2s still charge up Beasthood by a head-noddingly decent amount. Of course, that was true without the rune. It makes the weapon cooler, it certainly makes your character look cooler, and absolutely not like a rejected first draft for an X-Men villain. But my favorite part about this weapon is a basic yet extremely useful feature rooted in the claw itself and not the rune, which is why I feel like it should count. The transformed mode gives you a permanent Beasthood meter that can stack with other self buffs. Now normally if you popped a horse pill and then tried to buff with, let's say, a lead elixir or something to keep the carnage going, you just wouldn't be able to, like it would just be grayed out. But the Beasthood given to you from the claw is a unique effect and can stack with other self buffs. You also don't lose the beast hood you've built up attacking with the transformed claw when you switch weapons, giving it uniquely powerful damage boosting properties that retains its effectiveness even at level 0, because you would be building the beast hood meter just to attack with another weapon. Every video I've seen talk about the beast claw, like, they don't go anywhere near this, and I think it's one of the most valuable assets the beast claw has to offer. They felt fast and strong enough to not just keep up with most human bosses and enemies, hunter NPCs, and even Gehrman and Maria, but absolutely erase them from the game's file space. The stagger values being as high as they are on just basic R1 combos was enough to render most same-sized opponents completely indefensible. But when it came to dealing with actual beastly threats like Ludwig and Dark Beast, opponents that are big enough to not really give a shit what your weapon stagger value is, a noticeable drop-off in performance was felt, and the consequences of that high beasthood meter felt worse and worse to deal with. Because even though I was certainly fast enough to keep up with these kinds of bosses and reliably build the meter, I didn't feel like I was doing that much against limbs and weak points and such. They're amazing when they work, but it's by far not the one weapon you should depend on when going after anything bigger than you are, unless you're just good at not getting hit. And if you are, then fuck me, maybe you should give me advice. Number 17, Simon's Bowblade. Being able to peg enemies at a comfortable range does have some obvious positives, but this is pretty much a New Game Plus exclusive armament since you get it right as you're wrapping up everything in the hamlet and preparing to go fight the screaming Resident Evil campaign extra downstairs. So if you're shelving this game without checking out New Game Plus, then that's the end of your time with this weapon. Had they thought of this bow like several months earlier and tossed it into the base game, fighting that Amygdala in the Frontier might have actually been in the same household as something resembling a good time. Honestly, I think the Bowblade misses out on what I think would have given the bow the last little push it needed to secure a spot in the upper echelons, which is that the arrows fired from the bow deal blood damage and not thrust damage. Had they inflicted thrust damage, I think this would have opened up an excellent window for visceral attacks against large foes in a way that would have covered up a lot of its shortcomings. Reiterpallasch and Rifle Spear already do a decent enough job with visceral attack builds, but only on smaller enemies and same-sized bosses like Gehrman and Maria. You can parry BSB with a gunshot, but that's about the biggest game you're hunting with these. The Bowblade can easily take down foes like Ebrietas, Cleric Beast, basically anything that has an identifiable head gets absolutely mulched by the charged R2 in bow form. And having arrows deal thrust damage I think would have fed into visceral attacks on these types of foes, just dealing that much more damage, since viscerals are thrust damage. In fact, the only physical damage available during bow mode is the jumping R2 that is literally a bow attack, like you attack with the bow, and the L2 attack, which is I don't even think I can legally declare this an attack. Like, the attack value is horrible, the recovery time is piss, and this is the move you're forced to perform trying to fire an arrow when out of Quicksilver bullets. Like, if this was Elden Ring, this would become a fucking weapon, Ash. Number 16, the Kirkhammer. The Kirkhammer is poised to star as the main antagonist of the gripping yaoi manga between your hunter and their primary love interest, the Holy Blade. In multiple ways, the Kirkhammer is set up to be this weapon's counterpart, with an identical basic moveset, and even a couple of their transformed attacks, like the backstep R1 that no one uses. I feel like dismissing this one and just butt-rushing to the ward to pick up the Radiant Hunter badge is a valid solution to your problems, since the Kirkhammer does lose pretty hard in a straightforward competition versus the Holy Blade, but I think you can have that opinion and also recognize a few of the Kirkhammer's talents in the same breath. The Kirkhammer's transformed mode comes with a unique shockwave AoE that accents every attack that ends with the hammer striking the ground, giving the hammer a much weightier feel than the Holy Blade. This includes all R1s in its chain, the dodging R1, and both the charged and uncharged R2s. Its transformed attacks also exhaust way less stamina despite having attack and stagger values equal to the Holy Blade, and the third attack in its L2 string is much more powerful, provided you can mash your way there before you find a werewolf's foot in your ass. It's a bit slower. It's quite a lot slower, actually. And despite the strength scaling being higher than anything the Holy Blade can offer, it doesn't really have any noticeable competencies anywhere else, leaving very little room for this weapon to actually stand out in a positive way past the mid-game. Number 15, the Stake Driver. This would have been the perfect weapon if it had any courtesy and respect for your free time, but that charge-up duration needs a task on a Trello board for how long it takes and how nervous I am that I'll get flinched out of it beforehand. That 355 attack value is more than worth it though. Lead elixirs aren't completely necessary here, but they're a wonderful tool to help you practice what attacks from which enemies you can and can't punish. Against bigger bosses like Ludwig and the One Reborn, it's honestly, it's not even that hard. But the tricky targets are the hunters, the ones that move around a lot. Because no joke, you could parry a hunter and immediately start charging the stakes transformed R2, and they would be back up and in the middle of another attack before you even fired it off. That is not a joke. I've seen retirement home traffic jams that move quicker than this charged R2. They could have done away with the improved attack value altogether just so it wouldn't necessitate the lengthened charge time, and I think I still would have fallen in love with it. That charged R2 sound effect is hypnotically good. I'll be in the hunter's dream firing this bitch off at a gravestone just to hear myself do it while the doll wonders what the fuck is wrong with me. And then I'll blast a hole in her ass too. This sound could be played on slot machines at casinos. I haven't talked about the rest of the moveset, and I have zero plans to do so, because I know you have zero plans to listen. There is one single star of the show here, and it's that spine blaster of an R2. Blood gems also get really fun on this one. Striking gems finally have their own dedicated weapon, but arcane remains its highest scaling at 63. And this got me thinking about elemental conversions. In most cases, this will almost never return numbers as consistently high as a set of temperings, and are usually just placed on a weapon for the means of hard countering a specific type of enemy or boss or region or whatever. Blasting someone with an oil urn and then molesting their whole life with some cheeky fire damage is usually reserved for very specific weapon setups that deal exclusively fire damage, and the bigger the original attack value is, the more worth it that becomes. And you've got your hands on the single highest attack value in the entire game right here. And an oil-doused enemy being the target of a fire-infused charged R2 from this is going to have a very shitty day. Honestly, it's either that or striking gems. This thing may have had a generationally bad roll with its scalings, but that also means building for it is a very simple ordeal, even during later New Game Plus iterations. And when I remember how complicated building around some of these weapons can get, I'm just thankful I can plug in a handful of striking gems and call it a day. Number 14, the Logarius Wheel. Flexibility and combat options on a strength build usually go together like wooden houses and hurricanes, but if the whack-a-mole combat style of the Kirkhammer left your dopamine receptors feeling dry and shriveled, why not give that Unga Bunga build a PhD with an arcane split and some scary sound effects? The strength scaling on this thing is unreasonably massive, and a high enough strength investment can have this wheel delivering blunt damage similar to an actual car accident. That's all I'm saying about this half of the weapon. You know what a strength build is. Now, transforming the wheel does a few things. Upon transform, the wheel loses out on 30% of its physical damage and trades that for an arcane scaling boost of 50, bringing the total arcane scaling to 110, which is the same scaling it would get in strength. Its arcane damage output is also given a multiplier of 3 plus an extra 20 flat arcane damage on the side. I don't know what mathematician FromSoft has had locked up in the same office for the last 11 years, but now that it's gotten much easier to dig into the weeds of how Bloodborne works recently, it is kind of funny to see how little the scaling conventions have changed over the years. The L2 gives the weapon an arcane buff that provides even more arcane damage at the gradual expense of your HP, which can then be recovered by attacking since the rally doesn't degrade at the same pace as the HP sap. This is a 20-second buff, and it can stack up to 4 times, but the buff potency is bound to an attack chain, meaning if you want to stack it, you have to press L2 with the same pace you would be if you were attacking something. So if you rev it up to stage 3 for instance, and then 5 seconds into the buff, let's say you decide you want to go an L2 further for max stacks, it's just going to bring it back to stage 1 again. With the existence of Alfred's questline, I've long considered this wheel to be a counterpart to the Chikage, since both weapons have a transformed mode that emphasize a second damage type and require sacrificing HP to deliver powerful attacks, and the wheel's 30% righteous damage in both modes help clean out Canehurst that much quicker. Gemming up this king can require some real thinking cells, so make sure to take some stimulants before attempting to augment your own wheel. This is probably one of the most flexible weapons in the game regarding available builds because so many little attributes about the weapon get changed around in such a massive way when transforming. Temperings? Good. Strength scaling? Good. Striking gems, good. Blunt damage gems, good. Arcane gems, good. Arcane scaling gems, probably even better. Even poison gems can perform pretty well when hitting enemies with the wheel's multi-hit R2s when transformed. And since you can already kinda gain some HP back from attacking due to the rally bar having to play this game of catch-up, you can even throw some lethal gems on it to help you out even more. Maybe not enough to nullify the HP loss outright, but you can get pretty close. As long as everything you're throwing on it is buffing the same 1 or 2 attributes, this weapon can handle anything in the game that doesn't relate to aliens or jello. Number 13, the Hunter Axe. I like elemental setups on this weapon a lot. The arcane scaling isn't that bad, it's actually pretty good. And going full elemental damage opens up a lot of room to exploit damage weaknesses like bolt damage versus brain suckers, or fire damage versus I guess everything, to be honest. Everything else, at least. It's a really great weapon, but in a really simple and dependable way. So simple and so dependable that it became an early pick for the game's most broken weapon before people started speedrunning. Surely spin to win and high rally weren't the only two reasons behind why this axe was able to charm so many players in the heyday, but after a solid replay with it, I think those reasons might be enough. The strength and arcane scalings and high base damage feel just serviceable enough to stay threatening throughout the whole game despite being a starting weapon. It has a variety of different animations in its moveset that allow for both wide sweeps versus crowds and overhead swings that can take care of high hitboxes on big enemies. The charged R2 covers a massive area in front of you and comprises two separate hits, also with their own separate non-lowered attack values, totaling out to 280, not including base defenses, and usually on a multi-hit charged attack, one of these would be lowered substantially. And this feels to me like the biggest reason why this single attack feels like it's able to handle almost anything. Even with comically oversized weapon modes like on Kirkhammer and LHB, a charged R2 almost never goes above like 220 or 230, give or take. Its only competition remains the Stake Driver's 355, which needs almost twice the charge up time and covers a space small enough to be accepted as carry-on luggage. Number 12, the Rakuyo. Fuck's sake, this needs more strength than the axe. I mean, it's the signature weapon of the penultimate DLC boss, and you don't even get it until afterwards when you find it guarded by a couple sharks. If you don't meet the benchmarks, then you decided you didn't care like 7 bosses ago, so whatever. That exact weapon just stomped a hole through me so big I could shoplift a TV in my asshole, and then I just find it here 5 minutes later. The description says she abandoned it, so did she race me here just to pitch it down into the well? You won't be able to bloodify the swords like she does in the fight either, but you do have access to a large moveset that somewhat resembles her own. The mix of standard and thrust damage handed out by its basic R1 combo means there aren't too many threats in the game you can't just spam attack your way through. And the L2 spin combo, being the crowd killer that it is, gives you an incredible list of options when it comes to taking care of any number of threats. Inputting L2 after any light or heavy attack while transformed also has its own attack as well. Not crazy about it not even being willing to climb to an S in skill despite the fucknuts amount of skill I even need to wield it. Yeah, 20 in a stat was a lot for this game. But leveling in such a direction means skill investment is the only thing you care about anyways, or should care about. Probably not even the arcane stat, even though this weapon is buffable and open to elemental shenanigans with the right gems. Whether or not you head down that route is up to you, and if you have gems that are good enough, but those better be some spicy bonuses because a dedicated skill build is just about the only kind of character this'll do numbers on. Tempering gems and sharp gems seem to be the community favorites. Number 11, the Bloodletter. We still got a good ways to go before the good old Chikage sandwich appears, but that and the Bloodletter are the two quintessential blood tinge weapons with actual blood in its attacks. I would still give the match point to the Chikage. I gotta stop saying that. People are gonna think I don't know the pronunciation. I would still give the match point to the Chikage for its insanely high flexibility and wider potential, but my runs with the Bloodletter are way more enjoyable if I'm being honest. The Chikage is a picky bitch that doesn't know what she wants half the time, but the Bloodletter is beautifully uncomplicated, a master of her own priorities. The hammer mode deals physical damage and scales with strength, the tricked mode deals blood damage and scales with blood tinge, and building around either is as straightforward as the metal pole in my mom's back. I typed the word Pope for some reason. It's pole. It was supposed to be pole. It has one of the funnest L1 attack animations that deals damage to you and immediately heals it all back when striking an enemy due to the rally system, and there's almost zero worry in taking any additional damage because whatever gets hit by this pretty consistently kisses the floor with their ass cheeks. The L2 does stack a pretty mean chunk of frenzy on your character, and you should definitely consider dedicating a rune slot to dealing with that. But getting frenzy procced in this way only shaves off 50% of your HP compared to the usual 70. Its rally multiplier is also one of the largest in the game, sitting at 400, allowing you to heal some incredible amounts of HP back with this attack, and opening some fun shenanigans with lead elixirs. I think Brador using this item against you is what's supposed to clue you in on the L2's hidden strength, seeing how I've almost never seen him use that attack against me. Mostly because I just blast him down like Cyclops from the X-Men until he leaves me alone. Like this aura walking bitch was keeping some secrets. Number 10, the Holy Moonlight Sword. You're gonna be slapping with high amounts of physical and arcane with this one. Usually when a weapon switches damage modes like this, the physical damage would take a hit in exchange for the secondary damage, but this one lets you keep both, in addition to just making one better. I have nothing to say about the standard form because every last facet of how this weapon works points you completely in the other direction, even including a consistent use for your Quicksilver bullets so they don't get lonely up there with you two-handing the sword. If you're in the standard form, it better be because you're about to L1 an ethereal moon dick up a hunter's ass. It's one of the only weapons where I would actually recommend only nourishing gems because the attack values of physical and arcane damage wind up very close together when transformed, with your arcane doing roughly 3/4 of your physical damage, give or take. And the closer these values end up being on split damage weapons like this, the greater the benefit received from a generic, all-encompassing, no bullshit attack boost. And that's exactly what the nourishing gems are for. I really like how the R1 chain starts with 2 diagonal swings that seem to be single target focused and don't cover too much horizontal space, and then you start swinging wide by the 3rd attack. This handles an all too common situation where you try to isolate one shitter from the rest of the crowd and they respond to that by running at you all at once. Happens a little too frequently, but this moveset is wonderful for those situations. Number 9, the Burial Blade. So, couple things about the Burial Blade here. A lot of its motion values are really strange when compared to other weapons, namely in the department of dodge attacks and rally. The way the attack values are set up on this weapon pushes the player towards the idea of evading damage and then countering with a roll or dodge attack. The modifiers are slightly higher than what you would see normally, with its transformed rolling and dodging R1s all measuring in at 120. Where the average would be closer to something like 110 or 105, or sometimes even less than 100. Blade of Mercy is set up with the same kind of values, which support the same dodge-hit-dodge playstyle. They're also both made of the same heavenly mineral known as siderite? Siderite, yeah, which makes that really satisfying shing sound you hear during the same attacks. This combined with its oddly and kinda alarmingly high rally MVs, especially on its transformed R1 chain, makes for a remarkably strong option when pushing through high intensity areas with crowds of enemies. The attacks in the transformed R1 chain have rally values of 195. This is absurdly uncommon. For the sake of comparison, the Chikage's transformed mode also has notably higher than average rally values to offset the gradual HP loss, but even the R1s on this weapon trail the Burial Blade by a good 50 or so. You really notice the difference in blood vial expense when taking beatings during long excavations across high traffic areas like Yahar'gul. The L2 chain almost feels like it's acknowledging its own shittiness in tight spaces due to deflection off walls, because it's this high vertical reach that covers almost no width at all, which is why it remains a favorite of mine for disposing of Amygdalas and Vicar Amelia. Like, get into a slap fight with whatever you want with this thing. You will not die. Number 8, the Chikage. This is one of the very few weapons in the game where the transformed mode will drastically change the kind of damage you're handing out. And although it can be a little confusing to build around correctly, it's obviously a blood tinge focused weapon, and just rounding up the best tempering gems you can find and thugging out the HP sap on its transformed mode is probably the easiest answer to this question, but it doesn't really cover all the bases. I don't know how silly you want to get when you play your games. I just know this weapon can be taken in so many different directions, it's nuts. Physical damage bonuses given by tempering gems can affect both modes, while blood tinge and blood damage gems only affect the transformed mode. You may also choose to build into the rapid poison effect, or you can just use it as a pure physical damage option for a skill build because you really want to use a katana. The HP decay mechanic also doesn't only eat away at you for the same consistent amount all the time. If you're standing there holding it in its corrupt form, it whittles down at almost 1% of your max HP per tick, but if you're charging a transformed R2, for example, that's a pretty hefty amount of HP you'll have to sacrifice to get that off. Around 15% of your max, give or take. Looks pretty scary, kind of is scary if you fuck it up, but this gives you a reliable way to take your HP down to a certain point if you're trying to activate a near-death gem bonus. The rapid poison route also isn't, like, it's not terrible, it's not good either. The way it works is that each hit of the weapon inflicts 30 rapid poise per hit, and you'll know when the status procs due to the targeted enemy losing 10% of their max HP plus 100 additional, it's just bleed. Like, it's literally just a bleed status. Like, what the hell happened to this game's naming conventions? Any other Souls game would have just called it blood loss or corruption or something. Fucking anything but the word poison. Like, I was expecting this to go down gradually. That's what poison builds do. It also does not scale with any stat and will not be improved when upgrading the weapon. So unless you've got a few rapid poison gems handy, that 30 buildup ain't moving for shit. It is drawing a line in the sand and staying right where it is. This can commonly feel like just blooding up the weapon and R1ing shit to exhaustion is the only way to actually proc the effect, because a majority of your boss encounters in the game are stacked with 999 resistance to both types of poisons. I don't care what the Excel sheet says, do not give up. That shit is way more possible than it sounds. It's still difficult, but the dopamine release from that proc is gonna last you for the next 3 business days. Number 7, the Threaded Cane. I don't know who gave this cane the confidence issues it has, but this pocket warhead got plugged up with so many small advantages that it's managed to trick half a community into thinking it's bad. The upfront damage at a first glance is already pretty unsubstantial, and it also has no choice but to directly compete with that found on the Cleaver and the Axe, the other 2 starting hunter weapons, which, yeah, that's just not a scuffle this little cane wants to get caught in. The whip attacks when transformed are even less impressive with all the speed you're sacrificing, but it also doesn't ever feel like the attack is covering as much ground in front of you as it probably should. However, this cane has some secrets. It's the only starting weapon of the 3 that can be taken to an A scaling on +10. It can hand out both righteous and serrated damage depending on which form you're attacking with, making it the only weapon able to take advantage of both hidden damage types. No, the church pig doesn't count. We'll get to that later. And it's the only starting weapon capable of thrusting attacks. And that R2 poke is one of the quickest heavy attack animations on any weapon. Granted, the difference isn't huge, and this is a pretty empty advantage most of the time, but when you're dealing with brain suckers, a quicker thrust is something that's really easy to appreciate. The arcane scaling isn't bad either, opening up the possibility for the cane to be a secondary weapon with some really nice elemental potential. The additional skill boost it gets when in whip form makes it a crowd killer that could be talked about in a textbook generations down the line, but breaking weak points on big bosses also feels way too easy for a weapon this unassumingly small. And this combined with the extra skill scaling it gets in whip form can create some of the most aggressively one-sided boss fights in the game. Like, you're gonna see some real David and Goliath shit taking this cane anywhere past Amelia. Number 6, the Beasthunter Saif. I am coming to your front doorstep with roses in my hand, begging you not to take that scaling data any more seriously than the stranger standing in front of your house with flowers in his hand. I know the skill scaling still isn't really that fantastic, I don't care, wake your ass up. Every moment I spent with this weapon getting B-roll dared me to continue placing it higher. I still feel like 6 is too low if I like think about it too much, but this video has to come out at some point. If using spatial knowledge and awareness to comically shit walk around an enemy's attacks feels too above your pay grade or something, the Beasthunter Saif is a free trial of what your gameplay would look like if you were actually good at spacing. When transformed, the very first R1 slides you forward by what I would call an aggressively humorous distance. Like you thought the R2s on that Michelin sword were good at closing gaps, I'm finna slip and bust my ass like a Looney Tunes character just for committing to an attack chain. Any following R1s in the combo come out way faster, rivaling and perhaps even exceeding the attack speed of weapons like Blade of Mercy and the transformed Reiterpallasch, which is why the attack values and rally potential look so underperforming at a glance. The highest attack value you're capable of gooning out on this thing is the 180 on the default charged R2, and the reason that looks like shit is because it's shit, and you're charging R2s on a weapon made to build up a beasthood gauge. Wearing an attire set with good beasthood stats on it, like Braidor set, is something you should pay attention to as well if you commit to the horse pill route, because once you start getting into a flow state with those transformed R1s, that gauge is gonna get stuffed like a Thanksgiving turkey. Also, attack versus open foes. Do not sleep on that shit. Number 5, the Whirligig Saw. With base damage this high and a B in strength off rip, coming to the conclusion that this weapon is cracked like the goddamn Liberty Bell should take 0 brain power. The tricked mode is the obvious main allure here because of its physical serrated damage as an anti-beast measure, but that's not to say the default form is hopeless because the whole moveset deals either blunt or thrust damage instead of true physical. 18 strength is a bit high, but for a DLC weapon that honestly shouldn't even matter, and it's one of only 2 weapons in the entire lineup lineup that receive an S scaling in strength without the help of blood gems, the second being the Wheel. It is a saw blade, so fittingly you can inflict multiple hits on enemies with certain attacks, which maximizes the health restored via rally if you were just hit. It even does some pretty solid work with poison for this reason. It's definitely not an optimal combat option, but the window for a poison build is certainly there if you're bored enough. Temperings and nourishings for the gems are usually just good on anything that deals pure physical, and I consider that strength scaling an open invitation to get a bit silly with some heavy gem application. But as is the case with most of these weapons, it seems, there's always space for a dagger behind your back that no one suspects, and that dagger is the high B scaling it gets in Arcane, which leaves it open to receive ridiculous support from elemental blood gem setups. Going all in on strength is almost definitely the more optimal plan, but don't wait around for me to give a shit, because this might be my favorite way to build the Whirligig. Because in doing so, you now have a weapon that deals serrated damage in its tricked form, and you're capitalizing on elemental weaknesses. This is now a contraption of unprecedented convenience. You no longer need to switch back to default mace form just to access a thrusting attack because you ran into a brain sucker. Just fix it up with a bolt gem and let that part of your damage boil as balls instead. Or you can use a fire gem, and anything beast related gets exposed not to one, but two of their least favorite life experiences. The flexibility here with this thing is staggeringly impressive. Number 4, the Church Pick. The following data is a carefully picked through combination of my own test results and what I think other people and other sources are saying, so whip out your grains of salt because finding verification on how this weapon works was fucking miserable. Okay, so the pick technically doesn't get a serrated damage bonus in the same way other serrated weapons get their bonuses. The weapon does get a 20% bonus damage modifier against beasts, all beasts, not just the ones weak to serrated damage, but only when using thrust attacks. This is honestly way more practical than just a straight up serrated bonus because there are still a lot of beasts and enemies that aren't weak to serrated weapons. These damage modifiers were already intended to be completely hidden from us anyways, so I kind of feel like arguing over whether or not this is technically a serrated damage bonus would be time better spent ODing in a public bathroom. The righteous bonus only applies to the weapon's thrust attacks as well, which sounds like a real chore to keep up with, but tying the bonus to a specific damage subtype isn't nearly the setback that it sounds, because all attacks in its transformed moveset inflict thrust damage, and even the very first untransformed R1 attack is literally just like a forward stab. You will be dealing thrust damage in some capacity if you bring this to a party, like it is glaringly not your choice. Dexterity is overall the better investment at 70 scaling, but if you're venturing into new game plus 56 or some shit and you've hit the hard cap, the strength scaling is still a 40, so it's not like you can't squeeze an extra bit of damage out of it if you really want to. Also comes buffable with various papers, phantasm shell, any weapon buff you'd normally throw on before a boss, it'll work with this weapon too. Honestly, didn't expect this to be buffable even, but it is. A true all-rounder that can and will hurt anything you poke it with. I fucking love this weapon. Number 3, Ludwig's Holy Blade. This is just starting to not be fair for the enemies anymore. If you saw the plus 10 scalings and started looking for a catch, I have some findings to report. Don't waste your time generating a single situation in that mind palace of yours this sword cannot flawlessly put to rest. Put that time into studying for exams or some shit. Any basic tempering gem setup you can just throw together is gonna torque this sword's nuts to Saturn, but a lot of the greatsword attacks give out blunt damage instead of just normal physical damage, giving it a slightly higher ceiling for blood gems since damage subtype boosts found on blood gems are usually much bigger. The L2 attacks are the perfect answer to flying enemies in high hitboxes, and in close spaces where the wide swinging R1s would usually just deflect off a wall. The R2 poke gets enhanced by both charged attack and thrust attack bonuses on blood gems. It's one of the easiest weapons to convert to elemental damage because the arcane on it is its highest scaling for some reason, and that's all in addition to a 50% righteous bonus in both attack modes. Someone actually looked at the in-game damage and scalings on this weapon and just thought, man, you know what Canehurst needs? More reasons to shut the hell up. Fix this bitch up with some thrusting blood gems and that transformed R2 becomes a free one-tap versus Bloodlickers. Like, I don't know about anyone else, but righteous damage could literally just include Bloodlickers, and I still wouldn't bitch, because anything that helps me clear out Canehurst 50% quicker deserves its own spot of special thanks in the credits.
Starting to heat up.
Okay, I think it's time we have a little bit of a conversation. I want to take this one bite at a time here because I think it's more important that we agree on the fundamentals first, but I don't want to sound like I'm splitting hairs once I start comparing these two directly. Let's begin with the basics of the weapons themselves. Small stat benchmarks, mean-ass charged R2s, incredibly fast and incredibly comfortable transformation attacks, R1 attack speed that competes with Beast Claw and Blade of fucking Mercy despite the additional punch it packs, 20% bonus damage against the first, 4 bosses of mainline progression, and one of the most common enemies in between. One you pick up 2 minutes into Central Yharnam, and the other can be found in maybe 2 seconds because the game literally gives it to you at the start. It is a pretty fat laugh to even consider anything more deserving of the crown than these two workhorses right here. But we need to remember that confidence is supported by 11 years of experience and boredom we have to thank for why that knowledge circulated so well. I think the game throws up 2 separate flags that allow you to come to this conclusion yourself. First, there's the mathematical epiphany, which is the simple crunching of numbers and data, looking at animation speeds, analyzing hidden damage modifiers to arrive at the brain-deadeningly self-evident conclusion that this thing is broken, but in the worst kind of way. This level of power is not something you want on a starting weapon. It outright dissuades you from dicking around with other weapons in the game. Secondly, there's the game feel epiphany, which is a lot more subtle. You can't measure it, you can't write it down in Google Sheets, but I think a lot of people have felt it when choosing between weapons. On my first run, my first weapon of choice was the Cleaver, and my second pick was the Kirkhammer, because I thought running around wearing the heaviest part of the weapon as a backpack like you're trying to catch the fucking bus was very funny. I expected an upgrade. Anyone would expect an upgrade, because that's what the Cleaver is supposed to make you think. The Cleaver is a starting weapon. Yet picking up any other weapon in place of the Cleaver that isn't the spear means you are going to have to compromise on something. R1 speed, transform attack speed, upfront damage, ease of landing charged R2s, the hidden serrated bonus. None of these were known variables to me on a first run, but I still always felt this underhanded stealth bomb of disappointment that came with ditching the Cleaver that, at the time, I could never clearly explain to myself. All I knew was that whatever I picked up next, something about it would just feel off, like it wasn't doing as much. And of course, 11 years later, I just realize now that math is doing math things, and that's why they feel as powerful as they do, because of course they are. Now, these two weapons seem the same, yet they each demonstrate some small discrepancies on the surface. The spear scales more with skill, while the Cleaver sees more benefit on strength builds. The stat benchmarks are a little different. The spear gets lower base damage, but more range when transformed, and there's also some honestly pretty huge fucking talking points here. Huge enough that half of us just looking at the spear like it's a second Cleaver is, I'm gonna be real, it's not a conclusion I'm comfortable with. Yes, the Saw Cleaver is mathematically the best weapon in the game. It's a well-known enough fact that it can come with its own copy pasta, I get that, yes. But simplifying the Saw Spear and how it functions in combat down to Saw Cleaver with 5 less base damage cheaply ignores a lot of the spear's greatest advantages. The spear deals serrated damage in both modes, while the Cleaver only deals serrated damage in its default mode, making L1 attacks way more comfortable because they will always be dealing serrated damage. The spear gets a more useful set of moves when transformed. The backstep R1, running R1, and jump R2 are all thrust attacks. Brawls in tight spaces aren't as miserable. The charged R2 is also a thrust attack, and it receives a boost from charge attack and thrust attack gem bonuses. It has better arcane scaling, and it gets better elemental damage when stacked with appropriate gems. People really don't talk about this weapon a lot, and I think that creates this misperceived idea of the weapon being underrated or overlooked. No, you wanna know the real reason? It's because we fucking know. Okay, it's because we know. A lot of us have known for years, and the game is so old that we've circled back around to just having fun again, no matter what someone's Excel sheet tells us. And Bloodborne is a great game for that, because, and if you're getting sick of me saying this, that's the intent, there is no such thing as a bad weapon in Bloodborne except the Parasite, because the use of consumable items, tools, and especially blood gems can foundationally alter how a weapon works so much that it can sometimes feel like weapons outright refuse to be judged individually. If you see someone below justifying why my 25th pick is actually one of the best weapons in the game, it's probably because they're right as fuck, and you shouldn't let a list video dissuade you from having fun with something that isn't optimal, or whatever. I don't know how to end this. You paid for 26 weapons, you should use 26 weapons. Bam, there's your outro. Join my fucking Patreon.